all, this is Market Explainer. My name is Danny. I am joined always by the junior co-host, this guy, my good friend, the big man. We are America's #1 business news podcast. All right, well, before we jump into this next story, I want to tell you about Acre Gold. I want you to meet the new store of value, same as the old store of value. Acre Gold gives you the opportunity to invest in physical gold in 2.5 gram increments by buying a subscription, letting the money accrue, and then when you have enough money in that account, they send you a physical piece of gold. You can click the link down in our description and get going on your gold investment today.
Absolutely.
So this next story, oops, it's an oops. Gonna go, hey guys, oops. So there's a new piece of AI, and it's called Codex.
Yep.
And it can do its own programming. So here's why this is a bad idea. Have you ever seen a sci-fi movie?
See, this is where Danny kind of goes off the rails.
When you hat? Yes.
You know, and you know, I've said this before, you know, Danny typically curates these stories, but he always, whether he curates them or not, he puts them on our list, right, to talk about for the day, and he names them, right? He gives it like a headline article. And this one, he says, "Still sure nothing could go wrong," at the top of the story, because the headline of the story was essentially, we've developed an AI that can program other AIs, right? It can program itself, which on the surface does sound super scary, right? Like right out of the Matrix. Wait a minute, we've developed a computer that can build other computers, right?
Yeah. So the reason, so let me just off the rip say this much. I have not an issue, but I think we're approaching a scenario like Idiocracy, where we're building things that are so smart that it will mitigate any sort of future intellectual investment into those fields. So we're building computer systems and AI, that are so smart that they can build their own AI. Here's the problem with that. Eventually, there's not going to be a need for a person who can write AI code, right? And when that happens, the AI, I'm just saying we need to continue to invest in those industries, because eventually because somebody needs to be able to tell this thing what to not do.
So you're okay, because I love the movie Idiocracy. I get why it was made. You should. It's a great movie. It's a great movie. And it was made so long ago, even before the internet is what it is today, and cell phones are what they are today. So it was it comes back up from time to time, because if you haven't seen the movie, go watch the movie. It's great. It's a great representation of what Danny's talking about, in that, for example, we live in the most connected age ever. We have access as human beings across the globe to more information than we have in the history of existence. And the generation that is currently in high school and graduating college are the least educated we've ever had. Since we've started educating them. And so that, and some people question, some people, their answer is they have access to Google. Why do they need to learn it? They have access to a website that knows how to do it. So why do they need to learn it?
When you and I were in school, our math teachers probably said these words verbatim. You're not always going to have your calculator with you. Well, guess what, Mrs. McGrath? I got a freaking calculator.
Yeah, I was not allowed calculators, right? Like calculators were not allowed on tests. Calculators were not allowed on, but and that is a question, right? Can you be knowing human beings, and that in nature we are lazy, good for nothing, whatever's. If you build a program that does something for you. Will you then take the time? Will some people still take the time to learn that? Now, in this case, Codex, look, they built Codex. The company that built Codex built it to do exactly what Danny says. They built it to program other AIs to program, period. And what they've figured out through the development of it, much like a lot of companies out there that try to do this, at least so far with today's technology,
right?
They built a tool, a really useful tool, right? They built a really useful tool that will allow other programmers, actual programmers out there, to do things faster, quicker, whatever. Because if you have a programming buddy, if you're not a programmer and you're watching the show, or you've got a programming buddy, you've heard a programmer, much like a mechanic in the old days, complain about working on someone else's car. Programmers are much the same way, in that there's not one way to do it. You can, if I come up to you and say, hey, I want to build a new slot machine, 15 programmers may have 15 different ways of accomplishing that slot machine, and they all work, right? As far as what you see, they all work, but the back end being very different. Right.
And I, as someone who, you know, dabbles in graphic design and web development, I own a marketing company. I can tell you this much. When I have to pick up and solve someone else's website, or, you know, somebody's like, hey, I want an update, but I don't. The last guy who built it went back to graduate school and as a teacher can't do it anymore. That's a real situation. But it's always a pain in my neck. I'm like, why did they do it this way? Right. And I'm not, you know, there's a scene from the TV show Silicon Valley where, you know, the main character gets into an argument with his girlfriend because she uses tabs instead of spaces or something like that.
Right.
This entirely innocuous argument, there's nothing there. There's no point. You achieve the same thing, but how you get there is a little different. So this AI, which is brilliant, OpenAI developed this Codex, the program called Codex. It's brilliant. It's going to change how they develop a lot of different things.
Because you could develop a framework. Like in that scenario, Codex could help you build a framework where then that person, because Codex also, it has a voice activation part of it, which in itself is scary. You know what I mean? Say, okay, bring up, you know, in this case, building a slot machine framework, and then you're able to tweak it so that you build a framework for, this is how speed expediting products works, is you build a framework that then you can then customize and design. Now, what I found most interesting about this story is if you are ever a programmer or a technical guy or whatever, you know that when you interview for a job, especially if you're a contractor and they're bringing you in to do a job, you know that part of the interview process is they will walk in and they're famous for somebody that's interviewing to put something up on a whiteboard, right? Like, I want you to program this. I want you to simple code this, or I want you to fill in this blank or whatever, right? And then you as the interviewer have to go up there and kind of solve the problem or fix the problem or decode, whatever it may be. It's all over programming technology. The guy that tried this by the name is Tom Smith. He owns a small startup that's working on whatever. They gave it to Tom Smith to work on. He put it through his standard interview process of, hey, solve this problem, do this task, or whatever. The computer system did them all. Not only did them all perfectly, but did them all in minutes instead of hours or whatever it normally takes an interviewer or whatever.
10 minutes versus a minute,
but after playing with it for a while, he came to the same conclusion that obviously it's a good tool. It doesn't always do what you want it. It's one of those, right? Look, this is the same framework, guys, that when you're texting and there's an algorithm, an AI that says, hey, your next word is probably this.
Predictive
and it's
text.
right 75% of the time. This is a very similar technology in that it's going to be right. Actually, the article states that when it was asked to do tasks that it wasn't familiar with, it was right about 37% of the time.
So I'm no Luddite, but I do have predictive text turned off on my phone. I have predictive text turned off on all my emails because it's simple. There's for a lot of reasons, and this is the issue I wanted to raise with the story, which is if we create obsolescence for certain, if we use computer learning, neural networks, and AI like Codex, if we use, and this is more of a philosophical question than it is a business one, but it applies to the industry. If we create those systems that ultimately make it obsolete to have a physical human programmer, correct? We create a long-term trajectory where there are no programmers.
Well, right? But I don't know. You realize how much further we have to get before there. Right now, it's still going to be maintained because a program like this, the way it works,
I don't know.
A program like this, the way it works, and this is, again, trying not to get too technical for the people out there, is it learns by what other people have done. And then it aggregates that data and comes out an average, right? And that average becomes its rule, right? So if I'm asked, again, I'm going back to the slot machine, if I asked it to program a framework of a slot machine, it's going to reach out to the World Wide Web, all the data it has access to. It's going to pull in all of that information, and then it's going to spit out what it thinks is the aggregate of that information, which could be good, bad, not work, does work, depending on the amount of information that it has access to and how that information then gets condensed and spit out, right? So it's not like it's deciding, it's not a programmer, right? A programmer has all of its previous mistakes. It has all of his or her previous knowledge, right? All of that kind of stuff. And I like to bring up slot machines because slot machines are one of those industries that people don't know that, hey, guess what? They all have to be programmed nowadays. They don't run on keys like they used to machines. They're all programmed in nowadays. And guess what? None of these people that make these slot machines talk to each other. They both hire individual programmers to do these kind of things. And what happens is it's also an industry that if you're really good at it, you make a crap ton of money because everybody out there that makes slot machines wants you to come do their slot machines, right? So because it's a well-kept secret, like how you're doing it, how you're building it is whatever. So Codex in the current world of technology and for the foreseeable future will have to be managed by someone with that kind of experience, with that kind of knowledge, because it's aggregating, it's condensing, it's the difference between replicating the Mona Lisa and creating the Mona Lisa.
Fair enough. Now, like this, that's an adequate and more than fair explanation here. But again, I'm just asking, again, the 15-year philosophical question, which is, if we automate it, aren't we just, and I don't care about putting people out of work. It's the longer term question of, are we creating a future we cannot control?
You're right. That is a philosophical question that I think we always have to keep in mind. But I think that's where we differ on perspectives.
Yeah, I'm just saying.
I believe in the Gene Roddenberry Star Trek future, where technology, even though it becomes artificial intelligence and all that, that we as human beings, it allows us to aspire to higher things, that we continue to learn and grow. Danny thinks that at the point, idiocracy, that at the point that technology takes over, we all become idiots because we're all lazy morons and we only do things we have to do.
Or the Wall-E future, if you're unfamiliar with the Pixar movie, or the, I'm trying to think of the Mad Max future. These are all futures I see, right? Nonetheless, listen, fascinating that it exists. To me, right? It's fascinating that this exists. And it's just one more reason I regret not being more of a nerd in high school and caring about programming. When I think it's a step in an inevitable future. Yeah. We got Elon Musk building flipping robots, and we got this guy writing code that writes code. I'm sure everything's going to be just fine, big man. There's nothing to be concerned about.
Nothing to see here. Move along.
Nothing to see here. That's correct.